In the quiet suburbs of Colorado Springs, under the vast shadow of Pikes Peak, a two-story house with a white picket fence and a weathered swing in the backyard stood as the crucible of Sarah Mitchell's childhood. Now 35, Sarah, a fiercely independent woman living in Denver, Colorado, carries the weight of a past where she was never the star, always the shadow. Her story begins not with triumph, but with the subtle, relentless sting of being unseen in her own family. The Mitchells' home on Maple Drive was modest, 3 small bedrooms, a cozy living room with a faded green couch, and a kitchen that smelled of cinnamon waffles on weekends. Sarah's father, Thomas, was a lineman for the local power company, his hands calloused from years of climbing poles. Her mother, Linda, worked part-time at the public library, her glasses perpetually sliding down her nose as she sorted books. But their world orbited around one person, Sarah's older brother, Jacob, 4 years her senior, the golden child, the heir apparent, the one destined for greatness in their eyes, no matter what he did. From her earliest memories, Sarah felt the imbalance. Jacob could do no wrong. When he was 12 and accidentally set fire to the neighbor's shed while experimenting with fireworks, Linda laughed it off, saying, "He's just a curious boy, always exploring." Thomas paid for the damage without a word. But when Sarah, at 9, spilled juice on the carpet during a family dinner, Thomas's voice boomed across the table. "Sarah, can't you be more careful? You're always making a mess." The reprimand stung, not just for its sharpness, but for how it contrasted with Jacob's free pass. Sarah tried to earn their approval. In 6th grade, she won a statewide essay contest with a story about fishing with her grandfather by Lake Palmer. Clutching the certificate, she ran home, heart pounding with hope. Linda barely glanced at it. "That's nice, Sarah. Now set the table for dinner. Jacob's coach is coming over." That same evening, Jacob was handed $30 to buy new soccer cleats because he'd tried his best at practice. Despite skipping half the season, Sarah's victories, big or small, faded into the background, while Jacob's mediocrity was celebrated as brilliance. The rules were different for her. If Jacob skipped school or got into fights, Linda would cook his favorite lasagna to lift his spirits. When Sarah caught the flu at 14 and stayed in bed, she was left to fend for herself, heating canned soup on the stove. Once, she overheard Thomas telling a neighbor, "Jacob's got real potential. He just needs the right push." About Sarah? Not a word, never a whisper of pride or possibility. She internalized the message: try harder, be better, and maybe they'll see you. But no matter how perfect her grades, how spotless her chores, or how quiet her obedience, Sarah remained Jacob's little sister. Never just Sarah. The breaking point came when she earned a full-ride scholarship to Colorado State University. Linda's only response was, "Are you sure you can handle being so far from home? Jacob might need help with his college applications." Sarah was 18, standing on the cusp of freedom. Yet her mother's concern was for her brother's future, not hers. The day she left for college, no one drove her to the bus station. At 5:30 a.m., as dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, Sarah dragged her suitcase down Maple Drive alone. Jacob was asleep. Linda and Thomas were arguing over a car repair bill. This time, Sarah whispered to herself, "I won't look back." With $500 in her bank account, a duffel bag of second-hand clothes, and a refurbished laptop from a school donation program, Sarah arrived at Colorado State. The campus in Fort Collins, with its sprawling lawns and red brick buildings, felt like a new world. She texted Linda to say she'd arrived safely. The reply was curt, "Take care of yourself." Jacob didn't respond at all. He was too busy planning a gap year to find his passion. Sarah, meanwhile, threw herself into survival. She worked mornings at a campus coffee shop, the scent of espresso clinging to her clothes as she rushed to 8 a.m. classes. Weekends, she cleaned lecture halls and the library, earning $10 an hour. At night, she tutored international students, editing their essays for $15 a pop. Her life was a grind, but every dollar earned tasted like freedom. While Sarah budgeted every cent in a meticulously kept spreadsheet, Jacob's path was paved with her parents' money. They funded his enrollment at a private art school in Seattle. Despite his dropping out after one semester because the professors didn't get his vision. When Sarah asked Linda how they afforded it, her mother snapped, "He needs the right environment. You've got your scholarship, don't you?" Jacob cycled through 2 more schools, a community college in Denver, then an arts institute in Santa Fe, each time quitting with excuses like, "The vibe wasn't right," or, "The air's too dry for creativity." Sarah, on the other hand, double majored in computer science and data analytics, taking extra business courses to bolster her resume. She didn't go home for Thanksgiving her sophomore year, picking up holiday shifts at an electronics store to cover rent. After graduation, Sarah landed a software developer job at Nexus Tech, a fast-growing startup in Salt Lake City. She moved into a tiny studio apartment with a view of a parking lot, driving a used Toyota she bought for $1,500. She packed lunches daily, reused pens until they ran dry, and never took a vacation. Jacob, at 29, was still living with their parents, dabbling in entrepreneurship by reselling vintage vinyl records, until he quit because the market was too saturated. When Sarah called to share news of a raise 6 months into her job, Linda sighed. "Jacob's going through a rough patch. Maybe don't talk about money right now." Sarah hung up, her excitement deflated, and signed up for online courses in Python and cloud computing to boost her career. At 32, Sarah became a technical team lead at Nexus Tech. Her salary allowed her to buy a 2-bedroom condo in downtown Salt Lake, a milestone she once thought impossible. She celebrated quietly with colleagues, including her mentor, Rachel, a senior developer who listened to Sarah's story over wine. "You don't owe them anything," Rachel said firmly. "No one gets to guilt you for building your own life." Sarah nodded, but the words didn't erase the ache of her family's indifference. That ache turned to anger when Sarah bought a penthouse on the 40th floor of a sleek glass tower in Salt Lake City. The 2.200 square foot space, with its white oak floors and panoramic views of the Wasatch Mountains, was the culmination of 7 years of relentless work, late nights debugging code, skipped holidays, and countless overtime hours. On move-in day, Sarah stood in the empty living room, sunlight glinting off the marble kitchen island, and wept, not from exhaustion, but from the realization that she'd built something entirely her own. She didn't tell her family right away. Past achievements had been met with sarcasm or silence. But Rachel arrived with a bottle of Chardonnay and a bouquet of lilies. Toasting to Sarah, who carved her own path without anyone holding her hand. The words warmed Sarah, but a nagging doubt lingered, as if she'd stepped into a life she wasn't meant to claim. Hoping to bridge the gap, Sarah invited her family for dinner at her new penthouse. She prepared Linda's favorite herb-crusted pork roast and Thomas's beloved apple pie. For Jacob, she bought his preferred craft IPA. They arrived an hour late. Linda walked in, glanced at the floor-to-ceiling windows, and remarked, "Maintenance fees must be brutal here." "Huh?" Thomas muttered about mortgage rates. Jacob strolled through, opening drawers without asking, then said, "Nice place. But it's kinda empty, right? Just you here?" Sarah bit her tongue, set the table, and tried to salvage the evening. But the conversation revolved around Jacob's latest venture, a podcast about authentic living that he'd already abandoned. When Sarah mentioned her promotion to lead a citywide tech project, Linda nodded absently, then pivoted to Jacob's need for a new apartment because their house was feeling cramped. After dinner, as Sarah washed dishes, she overheard Jacob on the balcony, laughing into his phone. "Yeah, my sister's got this fancy penthouse now. She's totally lucked out." The word, lucked, cut deep. Her success wasn't luck, it was sacrifice. That night, something inside her shifted. She didn't invite them back, but they kept coming. Linda called about a leaky pipe Sarah never mentioned. Jacob showed up unannounced, saying, "Just dropping by for a beer." Then, during a critical work meeting, her doorbell rang repeatedly. Her security camera showed Linda, Thomas, and Jacob standing outside with duffel bags, as if moving in. Sarah's haven was becoming their resource. The pressure escalated. Linda called one morning as Sarah prepped for a presentation. Her voice syrupy but insistent. "Sarah. Jacob's struggling." The air in Sarah Mitchell's penthouse felt heavier after the slap at her brother Jacob's birthday party. The sting on her cheek had faded, but the betrayal lingered like a bruise on her soul. At 35, Sarah had built a life from nothing, a software engineering career at Nexus Tech. A sleek 2.200 square foot penthouse overlooking the Wasatch Mountains, and a hard-earned sense of self-worth. Yet her family, Linda, Thomas, and Jacob, saw her success as a resource to exploit, not a triumph to celebrate. That night, standing in her pristine living room, the marble kitchen island reflecting the glow of Salt Lake City's skyline, Sarah made a vow: no more. She would reclaim her life, her space, and her peace, even if it meant severing the ties that bound her to her blood. Sarah's first step was decisive. The next morning, she booked an appointment with Carla Jensen, a corporate attorney who had helped her navigate NexusTech's contracts. Carla's office, tucked in a high-rise with views of the Great Salt Lake, was a sanctuary of polished wood and legal precision. Sarah arrived with a folder stuffed with evidence, screenshots from her penthouse's security cameras showing unannounced visits from Linda, Thomas, and Jacob, text messages demanding money or access to her home, and a detailed account of the slap at Laura's house, witnessed by a dozen relatives. She slid the folder across Carla's desk, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. Carla, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, read through the documents in silence. When she looked up, her voice was calm but firm. "Sarah, this isn't just family drama. This is a pattern of emotional harassment. And that slap crosses into misdemeanor assault under Utah law. Family doesn't get a free pass when it comes to abuse." Sarah swallowed hard, the word, abuse, hitting like a revelation. She'd always thought her anger and exhaustion were her own weakness. "Does it count if it's from your parents?" she asked quietly. Carla leaned forward. "The law doesn't care if they're relatives. You have rights to your home, your peace, your boundaries." Together, they drafted a formal document, a cease contact order and a no trespassing notice for Sarah's penthouse and workplace, titled Personal Boundary Respect Request. It was a legal line in the sand, warning of consequences if her family continued their intrusions. Sarah drove home, the weight of the decision settling over her like the first snow of winter. That evening, she taped copies of the letter to her front door and the elevator on the 40th floor. She briefed her building's security team, a group of no-nonsense guards who nodded with understanding. "No one gets up here without your approval, Ms. Mitchell," the head guard assured her. For the first time, Sarah felt her home was truly hers. But legal documents alone couldn't heal the wounds of a lifetime. Sarah needed answers. Why had she always felt like the outcast? Why did her family's love come with strings? She found Dr. Vanessa Hart, a therapist specializing in family dynamics. Through an online directory she'd bookmarked in college, Dr. Hart's office, in a red brick building near Sugar House Park, was a haven of soft lighting and plush armchairs. During their first session, Sarah poured out her story: the favoritism toward Jacob, the dismissal of her achievements, the relentless demands on her success. She spoke until her voice cracked, expecting judgment. Instead, Dr. Hart leaned forward, her eyes kind but piercing. "Sarah, what you're describing is a textbook case of scapegoat syndrome in an emotionally abusive family system. You weren't weak for feeling angry. You were the only one strong enough to see something was wrong." The words landed like a lifeline. For 20 years, Sarah had carried the shame of feeling unloved, believing it was her fault. Now, someone had named the invisible weight. Dr. Hart explained how dysfunctional families often cast one child as the problem to maintain a fragile balance, while another, Jacob, was elevated to preserve the parent's sense of control. Therapy became Sarah's anchor. She started journaling each night, not to dwell on pain, but to map the patterns she'd normalized, the expectation that she'd give endlessly, the dismissal of her exhaustion, the way her successes were framed as threats to Jacob's fragile ego. 3 weeks later, Sarah decided to confront her family one final time, not to reconcile, but to set boundaries that could not be crossed. She chose the Hearthstone, a restaurant on the edge of Mill Creek Canyon. Its exposed brick walls and warm amber lights creating an atmosphere both intimate and controlled. She reserved a private room and informed the manager that staff could intervene if tensions escalated. Sarah arrived 20 minutes early, dressed in a tailored black blazer and slacks. Her auburn hair pulled into a neat bun. On the table, she placed 3 black folders, each containing a single-page document outlining 5 non-negotiable boundaries. No uninvited visits to her home or workplace. No financial requests. No distorting her story to others. All communication must be respectful, and any violation would result in 6 months of no contact. The first line read, "I'm not cutting you out of my life, but I will decide your place in it." Linda and Thomas arrived on time. Thomas, in a rumpled flannel shirt, avoided her gaze. Linda clutched her purse, lips pursed as if bracing for a fight. Jacob strolled in 10 minutes late. In a faded hoodie, hands in pockets, his expression a mix of boredom and defiance. Sarah greeted them calmly, offering no hugs. The server poured water and left. Closing the door, Sarah spoke first, her voice steady as steel. "This isn't about apologies or fixing things. It's about boundaries that should have existed long ago." She slid a folder to each of them. Jacob flipped through his, scoffed, and tossed it on the table. "What is this? A lease agreement?" Sarah met his eyes. "If that's how you see it, you need to read it carefully." Thomas tried to play peacemaker, his voice soft. "Sarah, we know you're upset, but isn't this a bit extreme?" She didn't flinch. "No, because when Mom slapped me in front of the entire family and no one said a word, I realized I wasn't safe with you anymore." The room went silent. Linda's face reddened, but Sarah continued, listing the boundaries with precision. "No more showing up at my door. No more asking for money. No more twisting my life to fit your narrative. If you can't respect that, we're done for at least 6 months." Linda slammed her hand on the table, her voice venomous. "Boundaries? With the people who raised you? You're shaming this family." She tore her copy of the document in half, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "If you think that penthouse makes you better than us, go live alone. Don't come crying when you're old and have no one." Sarah didn't react. She picked up the torn paper, folded it neatly, and tucked it into her bag. "I don't need a family that only lifts themselves up by pulling me down." Jacob smirked. "You're still the same nobody from high school, Sarah. All this success doesn't change that." She looked at him, her voice calm but cutting. "And you're 39, still expecting handouts. At least I know who I am." Sarah stood, leaving the folders behind, and walked out into the crisp night air. The city lights sparkled, indifferent to her pain. She drove home, the weight of finality settling in. Over the next week, she blocked their numbers and emails, each click a small act of liberation. When Jacob tried to bypass security at her building, claiming she'd forgotten to give him documents, the guards turned him away. Sarah saved the camera footage, a quiet reminder of her resolve. Therapy with Dr. Hart continued, each session peeling back layers of guilt and anger. Sarah painted in her spare room, turning it into an art studio where mistakes didn't matter. She joined a yoga class in Sugar House, meeting women in their 30s who listened without judgment. Over coffee one spring morning, she shared her story with a friend, Claire, who nodded knowingly. "I cut off my sister for similar reasons," Claire said, her hand on Sarah's arm. "You don't lose family, you find yourself." For the first time, Sarah felt seen, not as a shadow, but as a woman with a story worth hearing. 3 months after the Hearthstone meeting, Thomas emailed her, "I've been reading about what it means to be a father. I failed you, Sarah, and I'm sorry. I'd like to try again. If you'll let me." The words stirred something. Hope. Caution. Curiosity. She agreed to meet him at a diner near Liberty Park, a neutral space. Thomas arrived alone. No excuses or deflections. He spoke of starting therapy, of learning to cook his own meals, of seeing Linda's silence as a refusal to change. "I should have stood up for you," he said, eyes downcast. Sarah didn't forgive him outright, but she listened, and that was enough for now. "Jacob, She learned through a mutual acquaintance. Had moved to West Jordan, sharing a cramped apartment and working at a tire shop. It wasn't the creative life he'd chased, but it was real. Sarah felt no glee, only a quiet acknowledgement that consequences had finally caught up. Linda remained silent, unapologetic, sitting by her window, watching the world pass by. A stranger to accountability, Sarah's penthouse became her sanctuary again. She hosted dinners on her balcony, the Wasatch Range glowing under the sunset. Claire, Rachel, and her yoga friends filled the space with laughter. Their voices a new kind of family, one built on respect, not obligation. One evening, as the sky turned amber, Claire asked, "If you could change anything, would you?" Sarah smiled, her heart light. "No. The pain showed me what I'm worth." End of chapter 2. Sarah's journey is a testament to the power of boundaries, the courage to walk away from toxicity, and the beauty of redefining family. Her story isn't over, but she's claimed the pen, writing a future where love doesn't come with a price.